Captain Alara Voss gripped the armrests of her command chair as the bridge alarm screamed, red lights pulsing like a dying heart across the dimmed consoles. The air hummed with the sharp tang of ozone from overloaded circuits, and the deck vibrated under the relentless barrage from the Zorath fleet. "Status!" she barked, her voice slicing through the cacophony of warning klaxons and the low groan of straining hull plating. Lieutenant Kai Ren, her tactical officer, spun from his console, his face slick with sweat under the harsh emergency illumination, beads of it tracing lines down his stubbled jaw. "Shields at 20%, ma'am. That last volley from the Zorath fleet breached the outer hull. Decompression in sectors 7 through 9. Casualties mounting. We've lost contact with 2 maintenance teams." Alara's jaw tightened, a muscle twitching as she absorbed the report. The Zorath had ambushed them in the neutral zone, their sleek cruisers materializing from hyperspace like shadows given lethal teeth, their angular forms cutting through the starfield with predatory grace. Humanity's fragile alliance with the Galactic Council was hanging by a thread, and this unprovoked attack could snap it entirely, branding humans as the instigators in the eyes of the wider galaxy. She glanced at her small but capable crew. Kai, ever the steady hand at tactics, his calm demeanor a bulwark against panic. Dr. Mira Solis, the engineer with a mind like a fusion core, her quick calculations already whirring behind those sharp eyes. And Ensign Theo Grant, the young navigator whose optimism hadn't yet been crushed by the cold void of space, though the fear was starting to etch lines around his mouth. "Evacuate those sectors immediately," Alara ordered, her tone brooking no delay. "Mira, reroute power to the forward arrays. We can't outrun them, so we make them regret chasing us. Theo, plot us a course through the nearest asteroid cluster. Buy us some cover." Mira nodded briskly, her fingers flying over the holographic controls with the precision of someone who had patched this ship together, more times than she cared to count. Strands of her dark hair escaped her ponytail, sticking to her grease-smeared forehead. "On it, Captain. But if they hit us again, we're venting atmosphere faster than we can patch the breaches. The hull's integrity is down to 60%. Another direct strike to the midsection, and we'll have cascading failures." The view screen flickered erratically, showing the Zorath armada closing in, 12 vessels strong, their energy lances charging with an ominous blue glow that lit the bridge like a false dawn. Alara had faced down pirates and ion storms before, but this felt profoundly different. The Zorath weren't opportunistic raiders. They were the Council's enforcers, a species of calculated exterminators, and the whispers among human outposts said they viewed humans as a pestilence to be eradicated from the stars, a chaotic element disrupting the galactic order. Kai's console beeped urgently, a sharp trill cutting through the tension. "Incoming transmission, ma'am." It's Admiral Krell of the Zorath command ship, the big one leading the pack. "Put it through," Alara said, straightening her uniform with a deliberate tug, smoothing the creases as if composure alone could steel her resolve. No time for fear. Only defiance would serve them now. The screen split with a static hiss, revealing a towering figure with iridescent scales that shifted like oil on water under the alien lighting, and eyes like polished obsidian, devoid of warmth or mercy. "Human vessel," Krell intoned, his voice a mechanical hiss through the translator implant, each syllable laced with disdain. "Surrender your ship and crew without resistance. The Galactic Conquered has deemed your species a threat to stability. This is your end. Comply and your extinction will be swift." Alara met his gaze unflinchingly, her heart pounding like a war drum in her chest, but her tone remained ice-cold, laced with the unyielding steel that had kept her crew alive through a dozen skirmishes. "We've heard that before, Admiral. Last time it was the Vexari, and they're still licking their wounds from our little encounter. What makes you think you'll fare better? Your Council's edicts don't scare us. We've built our place in the stars on our own terms." Krell's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement or barely contained rage, the sound translating as a low buzzing vibration that set Alara's teeth on edge. "Insolence. Your ingenuity is your curse, human. We have planned meticulously for your extinction, accounting for every scrap of your primitive technology. Prepare to be boarded. Resistance is futile." The transmission cut abruptly, leaving the bridge in heavy silence broken only by the rising whine of charging weapons. Moments later, the Zorath fired again, their plasma lances lancing across the void like azure spears. The ship shuddered violently, sparks erupting from a nearby panel in a shower of incandescent fury. the impact jolting Ilara forward against her restraints. Theo yelped as he dodged a falling strut that crashed down inches from his station, the metal screeching against the deck, but he kept his hands locked on the nav controls, his fingers white-knuckled over the interfaces. Evasive maneuvers locked in, Captain. But they're adapting, predicting our vectors. Shields dropping fast. Hold course for now, Ilara countered, her mind racing through options. Mira, any bright ideas from down there? We need an edge. The engineer wiped grease from her brow with the back of her hand, her cautious nature warring with the fire in her eyes as she assessed the readouts. She had always been the one to temper bold risks with practical reality. But desperation forged unlikely alloys. The auxiliary thrusters, they're offline after that last hit. But if I jury-rig the waste recyclers to vent plasma, it might create a false signature. Make them think we're breaking apart in one direction while we jump the other. It could buy us a minute to align for hyperspace. Do it, Ilara said without hesitation, her voice steady even as the ship listed under another glancing blow. Kai, target their lead ship's engines. Make it hurt. Disable that command vessel if you can. As Mira dove into the access hatch with a determined grunt, the deck tilting precariously under the onslaught, Ilara felt the full weight of command pressing down like the gravity of a black hole. Humanity had clawed its way into the stars with grit and clever hacks not overwhelming might or ancient empires. But if the Zorath won here, it wouldn't just be her ship lost. It would signal the end for every human outpost, every colony dreaming of a bigger future, scattered like fragile seeds across the galaxy's unforgiving soil. Explosions rocked the hull in rapid succession, the ship bucking like a wild animal, and Kai shouted over the din, his voice triumphant amid the chaos. Direct hit. Their port engines trailing fire, it's venting plasma. They've lost synchronization on that flank. For a heartbeat, hope flickered in Ilara's chest like a stubborn ember. Then the alarms wailed anew, a piercing crescendo. Zorath boarding pods launching from their cruisers, spider-like drones burrowing toward the core with relentless precision, their signatures lighting up the tactical display like incoming meteors. They're inside the hull, Theo whispered, his usual wit deserting him for raw fear, his young face paling under the red glow. Ilara stood from her chair, drawing her sidearm with a fluid motion, the familiar weight grounding her. Then we fight like humans do, smart, stubborn, and unrelenting. Positions, everyone. This funeral they're planning, it's got our names on it, but not today, not while we draw breath. Ilara gripped the railing as the ship shuddered once more, the deck plates groaning like a beast in its death throes under the strain of the ongoing assault. Sparks showered from the overhead conduits in erratic bursts, casting jagged shadows across the corridor's scuffed metal walls, where emergency bulkheads loomed half-sealed in the distance. She motioned Kai toward the engineering bay with a sharp gesture, her voice cutting through the din of creaking struts and distant explosions. Secure that engine fire first. Get the containment fields back online before it spreads. Theo, with me to the access hatch. We hold the line here. No letting those drones near the core. Kai nodded, his face smeared with grease and sweat from the earlier exertions, already sprinting down the tilting hall without a word. He was the steady one, the mechanic who'd jury-rigged half the ship's systems from scrap during their last desperate supply run on the fringe worlds. No complaints, just hands moving like they knew the machine better than he did himself, fingers tracing familiar paths amid the tangle of wires and valves. Behind him, the wail of failing pumps echoed through the vents, a haunting reminder that one wrong move and they'd all be venting precious atmosphere into the void, their suits the only barrier between life and the cold embrace of space. Theo hesitated for a split second, his usual quip silenced by the red emergency lights pulsing overhead like a frantic heartbeat, casting his youthful features in stark relief. He clutched his toolkit like a shield against the unknown, eyes darting to the sealed bulkhead where the Zorath drones would breach any second, their acid-etched signatures already corroding the outer plating on the scans. Captain, those things, they're not just boarding parties. They're wired to strip the core clean, dismantle everything from the inside out. We can't hold them with just sidearms. We can and we will. Ilara snapped, shoving him forward with a firm hand on his shoulder, her sidearm feeling heavy in her palm. A human relic loaded with kinetic slugs that had punched through alien hulls and exoskeletons before. The Zorath thought them primitives, fumbling with fire and iron while their swarms dismantled worlds with surgical efficiency. But she'd seen what grit and desperation did to empires, how underdogs turned the tide with nothing but will and wire cutters. Move, or do you want to die standing still, staring at the wall? They reached the hatch, a reinforced slab scarred from prior skirmishes, dents from micrometeorites, scorch marks from plasma leaks, its surface a testament to the ship's hard-won survival. Alarms blared proximity warnings in staccato bursts, drones within meters now, their acid-tipped legs chewing through the outer plating with a relentless hiss that Alara could almost hear over the ship's labored breathing. She slapped the manual override with the heel of her hand, the mechanism grinding open with a protesting hiss of escaping pressure, equalizing the atmospheres in a brief gust that tugged at their uniforms. Beyond lay the maintenance tube, a narrow vein of cables and conduits snaking through the ship's innards, leading straight to the heart of the Endurance. If the Zorath reached it, the vessel was done. No engines, no shields, just a drifting tomb adrift in the neutral zone, a cautionary tale for any human ship that dared venture too far. Theo knelt swiftly, pulling out a handheld scanner from his belt with trembling hands that he forced steady through sheer willpower, interfacing the device with a nearby access panel that flickered to life under his touch. Reading 3 signatures inbound. Fast movers, Captain, they'll be on us in 30 seconds. Closing from the ventral breach. Ilara braced against the wall, sighting down her pistol with practiced calm. The tubes confines a natural choke point, barely wide enough for one drone at a time. Good. It would force them to fight her way, up close where human ingenuity could shine. Light 'em up when they show. Aim for the joints, slow them down, make them bleed time. The first breach came with a screech of tearing metal, like nails on a blackboard amplified 1,000-fold through the hull. Vibrating up through the deck, a spider-like form erupted into the tube, its segmented body gleaming under bioluminescent veins that pulsed with an eerie inner light, legs splaying for purchase on the slick surfaces, 8 eyes, cold, multifaceted facets reflecting the red alarms, locked onto her with mechanical precision. It lunged, faster than anything that size should move, acid dripping from its mandibles and viscous strands that sizzled on contact with the deck plating. Alara fired without hesitation, the slug tearing into its foreleg with a wet crunch, shearing it clean off in a spray of viscous fluid. The drone skittered sideways, spraying ichor that sizzled against the deck and filled the air with an acrid chemical stench. Theo joined in seamlessly, his laser cutter repurposed as a weapon in a heartbeat, the beam slicing a glowing arc across its underbelly with a high-pitched whine. It convulsed, legs twitching in erratic spasms but didn't drop immediately, its remaining limbs scrabbling for traction. Another shot from Ilara crumpled its core housing, the impact crumpling the armored plating. And it slumped heavily, blocking the tube like a felled tree, its bioluminescence flickering out in dying pulses. 2 more inbound, Theo gasped, wiping sweat from his brow with a shaky hand, his wit creeping back in the form of a shaky grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. Think we can bill them for the mess they're making? This cleanup's going to take weeks. Before she could answer with a wry retort, the ship lurched violently. Kai's voice crackled over the comms, sharp and urgent amid the background roar of emergency protocols. Engines holding, but barely. They've got a pod latched to the hull, cutting torches incoming. Mira's rerouting everything she can, but I need you to keep those drones off the core. A second drone burst through the blockage, shoving its dead kin aside with brute mechanical force, its form larger than the first, armored plates shifting like living scales that adapted to the dim light. It fired a dart from its abdomen without warning, the projectile embedding in the wall inches from Theo's head with a thud, the wall bubbling from the corrosive tip. He yelped, rolling aside instinctively as Ilara unloaded her clip in a rapid barrage. Bullets ricocheted off the armor, sparking futilely against the adaptive plating that seemed to harden on impact. "Flank it, get under the armor," she yelled, holstering her empty pistol and grabbing a loose conduit pipe from the cluttered floor, its surface still warm from the earlier power surges. Theo scrambled up, jamming his cutter into a vulnerable joint with desperate force. The drone whirled toward him, legs slashing in a blur of motion. One caught Ilara's arm as she closed in, drawing blood through her sleeve in a sharp line of fire. The pain immediate and searing, but she swung the pipe anyway, cracking it against the drone's sensor cluster with all her strength. Sparks flew in a brilliant cascade. It recoiled, blinded momentarily, its movements jerky as systems recalibrated. Theo's beam pierced the exposed gap, melting through to vital wiring in a shower of molten metal. The thing thrashed wildly, pinning his leg against the bulkhead with crushing force, the pressure eliciting a cry from him. He held the trigger down through gritted teeth, the cutter's whine rising to a scream. Ilara finished it with a desperate stomp to the head, her boot grinding until the lights in its multifaceted eyes dimmed to nothing, the body going limp. Panting heavily, she hauled Theo free from under the wreckage, his leg bruised and possibly fractured, swelling already visible under the fabric. "Go on, third one's coming. I'll cover you from here." She pushed on alone, deeper into the tube, the air thick with ozone and the tang of alien fluids that clung to her suit like a foul residue. The final drone was wedged halfway through the breach, its bulk too large for the narrow space, straining against the confines with emitters charging for a plasma burst that would vaporize the conduits ahead, dooming the ship from within. No time for finesse or careful aiming. Ilara spotted a live power line snaking along the wall, exposed from the earlier hits, its insulation frayed and humming with lethal energy. Humans didn't build for perfection. They built for survival, with redundancies and hacks that aliens could never anticipate. She yanked it free with insulated gloves, sparks dancing across the surface like angry fireflies, and jammed the live end into the drone's undercarriage, without a second thought. Electricity surged through it in a corona of blue fire, the Zorath machine seizing in violent convulsions, its legs buckling as systems overloaded in a cascade of failures. It tumbled back into the void beyond the breach, trailing smoke and the faint dying screech of failing servos. Silence fell at last, broken only by the ship's creaking protests and the distant shouts from Kai over the comms, coordinating repairs amid the chaos. Ilara slumped against the wall, blood dripping steadily from her arm, staining the deck in dark spots. They'd held the core, for now, but the Zorath fleet loomed outside like a gathering storm, their grand plan to erase humanity's spark just getting started, the neutral zone no longer neutral, but a graveyard in waiting. Ilara pressed her palm against the gash in her arm, the suit's auto-sealant foaming over the wound like desperate breath, bubbling white against the red. The corridor hummed with the subdued glow of emergency lights, casting long shadows that danced like ghosts across the bulkheads, where patched repairs from past battles peeled slightly under the strain. Kai's voice crackled over the comms once more, sharp and urgent, laced with the background clatter of tools and hissing valves. "Ilara, status? That drone's scrapped now, but I've got 3 more pinging the outer hull. They're probing for weak spots, trying to find another entry vector." She pushed off the wall with a grimace, her boots magnetizing to the deck with a reluctant thud that echoed in the confined space. The core chamber loomed ahead, its conduits still glowing faintly with residual energy, the heart of the ship beating against the odds, a fusion of human engineering that refused to quit. "Arms messed up, but I'm mobile. Core's secure for the moment. What's the fleet doing out there? Any sign they're backing off?" Kai's response came laced with static, his words clipped as if he were dodging something in the engineering bay, perhaps a sparking panel or a leaking line. "Holding position, but their cruisers are sinking weapons arrays. Looks like they're prepping a synchronized strike. Plasma lances, the works, coordinated to punch through our remaining shields. We bought some time with that engine hit, but not much. Get to the bridge. We need eyes on this, plot our next move." Ilara nodded to the empty air, adrenaline sharpening her focus to a razor's edge as she jogged down the corridor, her injured arm throbbing with each step. Sparks popped sporadically from a ruptured panel to her left, and she sidestepped a coil of frayed wiring that writhed like a dying snake on the deck, its ends still crackling with faint electricity. The ship, the Endurance, groaned under her feet like an old friend pushed to its limits, a testament to human stubbornness. Patched together from salvaged parts scavenged from derelict wrecks, no sleek alien elegance, just raw grit and ingenuity, holding it afloat amid the stars. She'd flown with Kai for years, him the steady tactician who anticipated threats before they materialized, her the quick-fix engineer who turned disasters into opportunities, and now, with the Zorath closing in like a noose, their partnership felt like the only sure thing left in the unraveling chaos. By the time she reached the bridge, sweat beaded under her helmet despite the cooling systems, mixing with the metallic tang of blood that seeped through the sealant. The door hissed open, revealing the familiar layout scarred by the battle. Consoles flickering, a haze of smoke lingering from a minor fire that Theo had just extinguished. Kai stood at the central console, fingers flying over holographic displays that flickered erratically under power fluctuations, projecting tactical overlays in ghostly blue. His face, etched with lines from too many close calls and sleepless nights on the frontier, turned toward her with a nod of relief. Good, you're here. Look at this. He swiped the hollow interface with a gesture, projecting the external feed onto the main view screen. The Zorath fleet. A swarm of angular vessels like jagged obsidian knives slicing through the void. Arrayed in perfect formation that spoke of ruthless discipline, their hulls pulsed with inner light, energy building for the kill, lances glowing brighter with each passing second. Ilara leaned in closer, scanning the readouts with a critical eye, her mind parsing the data streams for weaknesses. They're not rushing in for the kill. Why the buildup? If they wanted us gone, they'd have glassed the ship already, turned us to vapor without a second thought. Arrogance, pure and simple, Kai muttered, zooming in on the lead cruiser with a pinch of his fingers, the image sharpening to reveal the intricate web of energy conduits along its flanks. Zorath doctrine, make examples of the defiant. They're broadcasting a surrender demand on all channels right now. Yield your vessel and data core or face annihilation. As if we'd hand over humanity's last nav charts without a fight. It's psychological warfare wearing us down before the hammer falls. She snorted, a short bark of laughter that masked the knot of dread twisting in her gut. The data core held everything vital. Colony coordinates for the scattered human settlements, tech blueprints for their makeshift defenses, the fragile map of human survival etched across the stars like a desperate web. Losing it meant the end, not just for them, but for the scattered outposts clinging to life on hostile worlds, their beacons the last hopes against isolation. Screw that. We've got the auxiliary thrusters online yet. We could flank their formation, use the asteroid field for cover, let the rocks do the work of scattering their fire. Kai shook his head, pulling up the engineering schematics with a flick, the holograms rotating to show the damaged sections in stark red. Thrusters are at 40% after the drone hit. Mira's working miracles. But one good burst and we're dead in the water, drifting for them to pick apart, but... He paused, his eyes narrowing as he cross-referenced the debris field nearby. Chunks of shattered moon from some ancient war between forgotten species, tumbling lazily in the void, their irregular shapes a natural shield. Ilara followed his gaze, her mind racing through possibilities, synapses firing like the ship's overtaxed relays. Humans didn't win with perfect tech or overwhelming numbers. They won with scraps and spite, turning the enemy's strengths against them. Rig the mining drones. Load them with the spare fusion cells from engineering. Turn them into kamikaze birds. Detonate on impact against their shields. It'll disrupt the sink without burning our own fuel reserves. He met her eyes, a grim smile cracking through his fatigue, the first real spark of camaraderie since the ambush began. Risky as hell. If they intercept the drones, we're out decoys in half our power margin. But yeah, it could buy us a window to slip away into the asteroids. His fingers tapped commands into the console with renewed urgency, rerouting drone controls from the hangar bay. The interface beeping acknowledgments. Alarms blared softly in the background, a persistent reminder that the fleet's charge was climbing inexorably. The energy readouts ticking like a fuse burning down. She patched into the system herself, her injured arm protesting with a fresh throb as she keyed in overrides, authorizing the arming sequence. I'll handle the launch sequence from here. You plot the evasive path, make it erratic. Throw off their targeting algorithms. The bridge lights dimmed fractionally as power diverted to the drones, 4 battered machines. Relics from the ship's prospecting days on mineral-rich belts, now armed with makeshift warheads cobbled from fusion cells and volatile compounds. As the first drone deployed with a silent whoosh from the hangar bay, slipping into the void like a predator in the night, Kai's voice dropped to a more personal timbre, the tactician giving way to the friend. Ilara, if this fails, if we don't make it out, it won't, she cut him off firmly, sealing the launch protocols with a final tap, watching the feed as the drone streaked toward the Zorath line, a tiny spark against their overwhelming might. We don't fail. Not today. Focus on the plot. Tension coiled in the air, thick as engine grease and twice as heavy. The bridge crew holding their breaths as one. The fleet's arrays hummed brighter on the view screen, seconds ticking like a fuse toward ignition. Then the first explosion bloomed in the void, a brilliant flare against the Zorath shields, rippling their formation like a stone dropped in still water, distortions spreading across the energy barriers. Alarms wailed on the enemy vessels, visible even from afar as their sync faltered. The perfect coordination fracturing into hesitant bursts. Go now, Kai barked, slamming the auxiliary thrusters to life with a decisive command. The Endurance lurched forward under the strain, weaving into the shadows of the asteroid field as return fire scorched the void behind them, plasma bolts glancing off tumbling rocks in spectacular displays of deflected fury. But as they accelerated into the cover, a new alert pierced the comms with a shrill tone. A Zorath boarding pod had latched onto the midsection undetected in the chaos of the drone strike, its cutting tools already boring through the hull like termites in ancient wood. Intruders inbound, the fight no longer confined to the stars but crawling inside now, turning the ship into a battlefield of tight corridors and desperate stands. Ilara gripped the console edge, the taste of victory souring fast in her mouth, the metallic bite of blood lingering on her tongue. They dodged the funeral pyre for the moment, but the war had come home, and every inch of the Endurance would run red before it ended. Kai's hand flew to the intercom without missing a beat, his voice a whip crack over the blaring alarms that filled the bridge like a siren's wail. All hands breach in the midsection. Arm up and seal off decks 3 through 5 immediately. Ilara, reroute power to the bulkheads. Lock them down tight now. She nodded sharply, her fingers dancing across the flickering console with urgent precision, sweat beading on her forehead and trickling down her temple as the ship's schematics lit up in ominous red, highlighting the intrusion point like a wound. The Zorath pod had punched through like a battering ram, its cutting torches already slicing into the inner hull with relentless efficiency, the vibrations rattling the bridge in a low, ominous growl that set Ilara's teeth on edge, grinding against her resolve. Kai grabbed his sidearm from the weapons locker with a familiar click, the weight cold and reassuring in his grip, then glanced at her with a protective glint in his eye. "Stay here on the bridge. Lock the door behind me, coordinate from the command center." "Like hell I will," Ilara shot back, snatching her own pistol and a breaching charge from the emergency kit mounted nearby, the device's heft a promise of controlled chaos. Her cautious nature warred with the fire in her gut. She'd patched this ship together 100 times from near wrecks, coaxing life from dying systems, and she wasn't about to let termites chew through her work without a fight. "We need every shooter down there. Besides, you're the one who flies like a drunk in a hailstorm. Someone's got to keep you from crashing into the bulkheads." He almost smiled, a ghost of humor flickering across his features. But the deck shuddered again under another external hit, lights flickering as a nearby bulkhead groaned in protest, seals straining. They sprinted down the corridor together, mag boots clamping to the floor against the artificial gravity's wobble, each step echoing in the confined space. The air grew thicker with the acrid tang of melting alloy from the breach site, mingling with the sharp scent of ionized air, and distant shouts echoed from the crew below. "Jax," the wiry engineer with a knack for impossible fixes, barking orders to his team. "Mira." The medic now pressed into combat triage, her voice steady as she directed the wounded to safety. By the time they reached the access ladder to Deck 4, the first Zorath had fully breached tall, chitin-armored figures scuttling through the jagged gash in the hull like insects from a hive, their multi-jointed limbs clicking like shears on metal, probing the air with sensor arrays. One turned toward them, its faceted eyes gleaming under the pulsing emergency strobes, and fired a plasma bolt that scorched the wall inches from Kai's head, the heat washing over them in a blistering wave. He rolled left instinctively, returning fire in a tight burst from his sidearm that chipped the intruder's exoskeletal plate, sending fragments skittering across the deck. Ilara flanked right, her shot hitting the thing's jointed knee with a satisfying crack. It buckled with a hiss of venting gas from ruptured seals, collapsing to claw at the floor, but 2 more poured in behind it, their weapons humming to life with a low, menacing charge. "Jax, status down there!" Kai yelled into his comm, ducking as plasma bolts sizzled overhead, melting furrows into the ceiling and raining molten droplets. "They're through the cargo bay, Cap. Got 'em pinned behind the crates for now, but they're adapting fast, jamming our sensors with some kind of EMP pulse. Mira's holding the med bay, but we need reinforcements." Jax's voice crackled back, punctuated by the whine of his arc welder turned makeshift flamethrower, a desperate innovation born of the moment. Ilara primed the breaching charge in her hand, her mind racing through the ship's guts like a blueprint etched in memory, the layout of conduits, vents, and weak points that could turn the tide. The Zorath were fast and relentless, but they moved like they owned the place, assuming the Endurance was just another drifting hulk to be stripped, underestimating the human touch in every weld and wire. She spotted a conduit panel half torn open by the initial impact, wires sparking erratically within like exposed nerves. "Kai, cover me! Keep them suppressed!" He laid down, suppressing fire without question, the recoil of his pistol steadying his pulse as he picked off a leg from the nearest border, the shot eliciting a chittering screech. It toppled, thrashing in agony, but the others advanced through the smoke, their forms blurring in the haze of combat. Ilara jammed the charge into the panel, overriding the safeties with a quick hack from her wrist pad, the interface beeping compliance amid the chaos. Power surged, not to weapons but to the environmental recyclers, a dirty trick from the human playbook. She slapped the activate rune with her palm, and a whoosh of compressed air blasted from the overhead vents, laced with the raw chemical slurry from the waste processors. A foul, clogging mist designed to overwhelm organic sensors. The Zorath reeled back, their sensory pits clogging with the foul mist that seeped through seals. One clawed at its faceplate desperately, gagging through its breather mask as corrosive vapors ate at the filters. Another fired wild into the corridor, the bolt glancing off the ceiling and raining sparks down like fiery confetti. Ilara's improvisation bought them precious seconds. Kai surged forward, his pistol barking until the lead intruder's helmet cracked open in a spray of viscous ichor, the body slumping with a final twitch. But the pod's hatch was widening with a hydraulic whine, more shadows shifting inside, reinforcements spilling forth like a tide. Jax's voice cut through the comms again. "Cap, they're splitting up, half heading straight for engineering. Mira's rerouting power, but they get there, we're done." Kai reloaded with swift efficiency, his breath ragged but controlled. "Ilara, with me to the core. We seal it off, or they take the whole ship." She fell in step beside him, the charge's fumes clinging to their suits like a bad omen, a cloying reminder of the desperation fueling their defense. The fight was inside now, intimate and brutal, and every bulkhead they lost chipped away at their edge. Human grit against alien precision, with the stars waiting to claim the losers in this deadly game. Ilara's boots pounded the grated deck, each step echoing like distant thunder in the narrow corridor that twisted through the ship's midsection. Kai led the way, his pistol gripped low and ready, sweeping corners with practiced sweeps honed from years of frontier patrols, his eyes scanning for threats in the flickering shadows. The air hummed with the ship's failing alarms, a low whine that set her teeth on edge, vibrating through her bones like an unwelcome intruder. Behind them, the acrid tang of the improvised charge lingered, mixing with the metallic bite of scorched wiring that permeated every breath. "Engineering's 2 decks down," Kai muttered, not breaking stride even as the deck tilted slightly under residual momentum from the external hits. He punched an access panel with his fist, the door hissing open to reveal a service ladder slick with condensation from overworked coolant lines, beads of moisture gleaming under the emergency strips. "Jax, hold the line up top. Buy us as much time as you can. We're en route to the core." Jax's voice crackled over the comm, strained but steady amid the sounds of scuffling and energy discharges. "On it. Hepta, but these bugs are adapting quick. Lasers are bouncing off their hides now, like they've got some kind of refractive coating deploying on contact. Mira's got the medbay sealed, but we're stretched thin." Ilara climbed after Kai, her toolkit clanging against the rungs with each pull, the weight a familiar burden that grounded her amid the adrenaline surge. Her mind raced, piecing together the schematics in her head like a puzzle under fire. The core room's layout, the vulnerable access points, the fail-safes she could trigger. The core housed the fusion drive, a pulsing heart of contained plasma and magnetic coils that no alien tech could fully mimic, a pinnacle of human engineering born from necessity rather than elegance. If the intruders reached it, they'd overload the stabilizers without mercy, turning the ship into a drifting tomb, its crew frozen in the instant of betrayal. Humans had built this vessel from scrap and spite, outlasting the first waves of galactic invasion through sheer refusal to yield. She wouldn't let it end here. Not in some anonymous skirmish in the neutral zone. They dropped into the lower corridor with a thud, the lights flickering like dying fireflies along the ceiling, casting intermittent pools of illumination on the scuffed plating. Footsteps, clawed, deliberate, and unnervingly methodical, scraped from an adjacent vent, the sound carrying like a promise of violence. Kai spun on his heel, firing a burst that shattered the grill in a spray of fragments. A Zorath intruder tumbled out, its segmented body twisting midair with unnatural agility, mandibles snapping in anticipation. Ilara didn't hesitate. She yanked a plasma cutter from her belt and drove it into the creature's underbelly, the blade searing through chitin with a sizzle that filled the air with the stench of burnt organics. It convulsed, ichor splattering her visor in thick globs that obscured her vision momentarily. But two more poured from the vent behind it, their limbs unfolding like scythes ready to harvest. Kai shoved her aside protectively, taking a glancing slash across his arm from the lead one's claw. The suit tore with a rip, alarms blaring in his helmet as pressure warnings flashed. "Keep moving," he growled through gritted teeth, emptying his clip into the nearest foe in a hail of slugs. One went down smoking, its systems shorting out in sparks. The other lunged with ferocious speed. Alara rolled to her feet, grabbing a loose conduit pipe from the cluttered floor amid the debris. She swung it like a bat, cracking the intruder's sensor cluster with a resounding clang that reverberated down the corridor. Sparks flew in a brilliant arc, and it staggered, buying Kai precious seconds to reload with fumbling hands, the slash on his arm weeping blood that slicked the grip. Together they dragged the fight toward the core door, their breath sinking in ragged harmony, each exhale a testament to their shared resolve. Her cautious side screamed to fall back, reinforce the position with whatever crew they could muster. But Kai's grit pulled her forward, always forward, no retreat, no surrender to the encroaching dark. The core chamber loomed ahead, its heavy blast door ajar from a prior security glitch, a sliver of blue light spilling out like an invitation to doom. Inside, the drive thrummed with contained power, blue plasma arcs dancing behind reinforced glass viewports, the heart of their world beating defiantly. Shadows flickered within, 3 intruders probing the consoles with specialized appendages that interfaced in eerie silence, their tech weaving into the human systems like invasive roots. One turned toward the door, its multifaceted eyes locking on them with cold calculation, and emitted a chittering call that vibrated through the deck plating, summoning reinforcements. "They're hacking the controls," Alara whispered urgently, her heart slamming against her ribs like a caged animal. If they bypassed the safeties, the ship would vent atmosphere in a catastrophic rush or worse. Detonate from within, a self-inflicted wound to spite the borders. Kai nodded, his eyes hard as forged steel. "We go loud. You rig a feedback loop on the auxiliary panel. I'll draw their fire and keep them off you." She crouched by the side console, fingers flying over the keys with desperate speed, rerouting power through the alien probes in a bid to turn their intrusion against them. It was a gamble. Human code meshed poorly with their invasive signals, full of jagged edges and unpredictable surges. But if she inverted the polarity, it might fry their neural links, overload their implants in a backlash of energy. Sweat beaded under her suit as plasma bolts whizzed past her position. Kai trading shots from behind a makeshift barricade of toppled equipment, his movements a blur of controlled aggression. The first intruder charged him directly, claws raking the bulkhead in deep gouges that sparked on contact. He dodged with a roll, firing point blank into its torso, but it adapted mid-stride, deploying a shielding plate that deflected the slugs with a resonant ping. Alara's screen glitched violently, alien code worming its way in like digital parasites corrupting the display. "Almost there, hold them off just a bit longer." Jax's voice broke in over the comms, frantic now. "Cap, breach in the upper hall. They're overwhelming us, fall back to secondary positions." "Not yet," Kai grunted, tackling the shielded foe in a tangle of limbs and fury. They grappled on the deck, his human strength pitted against its mechanical precision, muscles straining until he jammed his pistol into a joint and pulled the trigger. The limb exploded in a shower of shards and fluid, but the creature's tail whipped around in retaliation, gashing his side deeply. He slumped against the wall, blood seeping through his suit in a dark bloom, his breaths coming in labored gasps. Alara hit enter with a final, decisive jab. A surge ripped through the chamber, feedback lightning arcing from the consoles to the intruders' bodies in brilliant forks of energy. 2 seized up, convulsing as their implants overloaded in a symphony of pops and crackles, collapsing in heaps of twitching limbs and smoking armor. The third, positioned farther back near a maintenance shaft, screeched in alarm and fled into the shadows, its form vanishing with a clatter of retreating claws. She rushed to Kai's side, sealing his wound with a quick dispense foam patch from her kit, the material expanding to staunch the flow. "We did it. Core's secure for now. Can you move?" He pushed to his feet with a wince, leaning on her briefly, his face pale but determined. "Good work." But Jax sounds like they're pushing hard up top. The comm erupted in a burst of static. They're in the bridge. Ship's turning on a collision course with the fleet. Get up here now. Ilara's stomach dropped like a stone into the void. The aliens had flanked them, using the distraction at the core to slip past. Human ingenuity had bought a fleeting reprieve, but the noose tightened with every passing second. They sprinted back toward the ladder, the ship's groan underscoring their defiance, a low rumble that seemed to echo their resolve. Ilara's boots pounded the grated deck, each step a drumbeat in the narrowing corridor that funneled them toward the heart of the crisis. Kai matched her stride despite the wound. One hand clamped over the foam patch on his side to stem the seep of blood, the other gripping his makeshift stun baton, a jury-rigged power cell wrapped in conduit wire, its surface humming with barely contained energy. The ship's groan deepened into a metallic wail that vibrated through the walls, as if the vessel itself protested the hijacking of its systems, bulkheads creaking under the strain of unauthorized commands. "Jax, report your position," Kai barked into the comm, his voice raw from the earlier scuffle and the pain lancing his side. Static crackled for a tense moment, then Jax's voice cut through, strained but steady, underscored by the muffled thuds of combat. "Bridge is compromised, Cap. 3 of those tall bastards in here, overriding the nav console with their tech spikes. Ships plotting a collision course straight into the fleet. If they succeed, we'll take half their armada with us in the blast. I held the door with what barricades I could, but they're beaming in reinforcements through a secondary pod. Hurry!" Ilara's mind raced, visualizing the layout in vivid detail. The bridge 2 decks up past the central hub where auxiliary systems converged in a nexus of cables and controls. If the aliens reached the core overrides from there, they could vent the entire atmosphere or worse, detonate the engines in a chain reaction that would light the stars. "We're closest to the access shaft. Can you buy us 30 seconds? Lock down what you can." Jax grunted in response, the sound punctuated by the slam of a bulkhead and a burst of energy fire.
"Make it 20.
Doors buckling under their torches, metals glowing red hot. They veered left into the shaft without hesitation. A vertical tunnel lined with emergency ladders and flickering service lights that cast elongated shadows upward. Ilara leaped onto the rungs first, climbing with frantic efficiency, her muscles burning from the core chamber's chaos, each pull a reminder of her injured arm. Kai followed close behind, his breaths coming in sharp bursts, the stun baton clipped to his belt for the ascent. Below them, the ship lurched again, artificial gravity flickering as the unauthorized turn accelerated, the inertial dampers whining in protest. Halfway up the shaft, a shadow detached from the gloom above, a spindly form dropping like a spider from the upper hatch, landing with predatory grace. It was the alien scout, the one that had fled the core earlier, its elongated limbs splaying for balance on the narrow rungs, eyes glowing faintly with bioluminescent targeting. No time for subtlety or ranged shots in the confined space. Kai swung his baton without breaking stride, the improvised weapon humming to life with a low buzz. Arcing blue energy that caught the alien mid-lunge. It spasmed violently, mandibles clacking in disarray but didn't drop immediately. Tougher than expected, their exosuits must have integrated dampeners to shrug off electrical surges. Ilara twisted on the ladder, kicking off the rungs to gain momentum in the low-G tumble. She drove her elbow into the creature's jointed neck, feeling the satisfying crack of chitin under her reinforced glove. The impact jarring up her arm, it reeled back, claws scraping the rungs in a shower of sparks, but lashed out with a tail whip that grazed her thigh, tearing fabric and drawing a line of blood that welled warm against her skin. "Go, I've got it!" Kai shouted, shoving past her to pin the alien against the wall with brute force, his body weight pressing the advantage. Sparks flew as his baton pressed into its torso, overloading a panel in its armor with a series of pops. The scout convulsed once more, then slumped lifelessly, smoke curling from the breach in lazy tendrils. Ilara didn't pause to catch her breath, hauling herself the final stretch to the hatch with renewed urgency. She yanked it open with a grunt, tumbling into the corridor leading to the bridge, rolling to her feet amid the clutter of discarded tools. Alarms blared now in full fury, red lights pulsing like a frantic heartbeat through the ship. The deck tilted further under the forced maneuver, inertial dampers whining in overdrive. Jax met them at the junction, his face smeared with grease and soot, a welding torch in one hand and a severed cable clutched in the other like a makeshift whip. "Took you long enough. They're sealing the bridge bulkhead from inside. Won't hold much longer against their tools. Mira's got the wounded stabilized, but we're on our own up here. The three of them sprinted the last 50 meters, feet sliding on the deck as the turn steepened, the artificial gravity pulling at them like an insistent hand. Ilara glimpsed the bridge doors ahead, dented and sparking from impacts. Alien silhouettes visible through the reinforced glass viewports, their forms hunched over consoles. One raised a device toward the door, a beam weapon charging with a high-pitched whine that built like a scream. "Cover down," Kai yelled, his voice a command born of instinct. They dove behind a console bank as the shot lanced out, melting a furrow in the wall with a hiss of superheated metal, the air shimmering from the heat. Jax retaliated instantly with the torch, a jet of plasma erupting from the nozzle that forced the aliens back into the bridge, buying them a heartbeat of respite amid the smoke. Ilara patched into the nearest terminal with her wrist pad, fingers flying over the interface in a bid to regain some control. "I can loop the security feed, make them think reinforcements are coming from the flanks," split their attention. But as she initiated the hack, a secondary alarm tripped across the system. The aliens had isolated the bridge's power grid, rerouting it to their overrides with ruthless efficiency. Her access bounced back, locked out by layers of encryption. "Damn it," she muttered, sweat stinging her eyes as it dripped from her brow. The plan was crumbling before it could take root, the aliens one step ahead in their domain. The ship shuddered violently under them, proximity alerts screaming in the background. They were minutes from ramming into the Zorath fleet, a suicide run that would doom them all. Kai glanced at her, his resolve hardening his features into a mask of determination. "Then we go manual. Jax, you and I breach from the vent shaft above. Flank them. Ilara, draw their fire from the door. Get them focused on the main approach." Jax nodded without hesitation, already prying at a nearby grate with his free hand, the metal bending under his strength. "Crazy, but it'll work. Just don't get vaporized out here. We need you in one piece." Ilara positioned herself behind the dubious shelter of a loose panel, using it to shield her body as she leveled her sidearm. She triggered a false explosion signal from the corridor vents, a classic human trick, hijacking the ship's own alarm protocols to simulate a secondary breach and incoming hostiles. The aliens whirled toward the doors, weapons trained outward, their chittering voices rising in alarm through the glass. As Kai and Jack slipped into the shadows of the vent shaft with muffled grunts, the bulkhead groaned under another assault from the inside, torches slicing through with glowing precision. Ilara's heart hammered in her chest like a fusion reactor on overload. One wrong move and the fleet would be collateral damage in this ambush, human and Zorath alike lost in the fireball. But surrender wasn't in their blood. It never had been. Not since the first ships left Sol. The first alien burst through the weakening door, its form silhouetted against the bridge's inner glow. Mandibles flared in aggression. Ilara fired her sidearm, the shot clipping its shoulder and forcing it to duck back, ichor spraying from the wound. Inside shouts, alien chitters and human curses echoed as the breach truly began, the air filling with the scent of burnt circuits. Kai's voice crackled over the private comm link. "We're in position. Hold them off. Give us 5 minutes to reach the overrides." She reloaded with mechanical efficiency, her pulse steadying into the cold focus of battle. 5 minutes to turn the tide or watch everything they fought for burn in the void. Ilara braced against the console, the recoil from her sidearm still buzzing in her palms like a lingering echo of each shot. The alien's clipped shoulder smoked with a foul odor, but it didn't drop. Instead, it lunged forward with a guttural snarl that translated as a mechanical rasp, its segmented armor scraping the deck in sparks. She fired again, this time aiming low for the legs, the bolt shearing through a joint with a crackle of energy. It crumpled to the deck, thrashing in futile rage as two more poured through the breached door, their energy lances humming to life with a rising pitch that set the air vibrating. "Flank left, keep them bottled," Jax barked from her right, his voice cutting through the chaos like a knife through fog, steady despite the odds. He was already moving, shouldering his scavenged rifle and unleashing a burst that pinned one intruder behind a sparking panel, the impacts eliciting angry chitters. Ilara nodded sharply, rolling to new cover as the bridge lights flickered from the strain of the assault, shadows dancing wildly. The air thickened with ozone and the acrid tang of burnt circuits. 5 minutes felt like a lifetime in this crucible, each second stretched by the adrenaline flooding her veins. The first alien she'd downed clawed at its comm unit desperately, barking coordinates in its clicking tongue, summoning aid that they couldn't afford. Alara stomped down hard on its mandible, silencing it with a crunch of exoskeleton, the vibration traveling up her leg. No reinforcements on their terms, not while she breathed. Jax glanced her way amid the fray, sweat beading on his brow. His usual grin replaced by grim determination etched deep. Kai's got the vents wired for a surprise. Any second now it'll hit. As if on cue, the overhead vents rattled with a building tremor. A low whine built to a crescendo, then erupted into a cascade of sparks and gas that billowed into the corridor. The ship's alarm protocols, hijacked by Kai's jury-rigged code slipped in earlier, flooded the space with hallucinogenic mist, human ingenuity at its dirtiest. Repurposing the emergency suppressants meant for fire control to disorient rather than contain. A chemical fog that clawed at senses. The aliens outside the door faltered, their lances wavering as coughs and disoriented hisses echoed through the breach, forms stumbling in the haze. But these two on the bridge proper weren't so easily fooled, their suits filtering the worst of it with adaptive seals. The larger one charged Jax directly, its lance sweeping in a wide arc that singed the air inches from his chest. The heat blistering paint from the bulkhead. He dodged barely, slamming the butt of his rifle into its midsection with a thud that reverberated. It staggered but swung back, catching his arm with a glancing blow that tore through the sleeve. Jax grunted, dropping to one knee as blood welled through the fabric, hot and sticky. Alara's stomach twisted in a knot of dread. She couldn't lose him here, not after the years of shared watches and narrow escapes. "Jax, cover! I've got this one!" She squeezed off 2 shots in quick succession, one grazing the alien's helm and forcing it to pivot, the other buying space. Seizing the moment, she lunged forward, grabbing a loose conduit from the cluttered floor and jamming it into the lance's power core with all her force. Electricity arced wildly in a brilliant display, the weapon exploding in a shower of shrapnel that sent the alien reeling backward, its exoskeleton cracking under the assault like brittle shell. Jax rose unsteadily, shaking off the pain with a curse, and finished it with a point-blank burst from his rifle, the body slumping in a heap. The second intruder hesitated in the doorway, scanning the gas-filled corridor where its comrades flailed blindly, sensors overwhelmed by the mist. Alara's comm crackled to life, Kai's voice hushed but urgent from his vantage in the vents. "Charges set and armed, pulling out now. You holding the door?" "Barely, make it count," she replied, her eyes locked on the remaining alien as it raised its lance with deliberate menace. "Make it quick, we're running out of time." The alien fired without warning, the beam scorching the console beside her in a molten streak. She dove aside, the heat blistering her skin through the suit, and returned fire from the prone position on the floor. Her shot hit home this time, piercing its chest plate and eliciting a final screech before it collapsed in a twitching heap. Panting heavily, Alara pushed to her feet, the acrid smoke stinging her lungs. Jax leaned against the bulkhead for support, tying off his wound with a strip torn from his uniform, his hands steady despite the blood loss. The bridge fell into a tense quiet, broken only by the distant moans from the corridor and the ship's ongoing alarms. 3 minutes gone, 2 left on the clock. The mist was thinning gradually and more shadows stirred beyond the door. Too many, their forms resolving in the haze like ghosts materializing. "We can't hold this position much longer," Jack said, his voice steady despite the strain etching his features. "Need that backup now, or we're swarmed." Alara keyed her comm with a thumb, urgency sharpening her words. "Kai status, where are you?" A pause stretched, filled with the muffled sounds of movement, then his reply. "One snag here. Vents collapsed on my end from a stray shot. Jax, you got any tools to clear it?" Jax cursed under his breath, rummaging through his pack one-handed, ignoring the fresh blood on his fingers. Grabbed the multi-wrench earlier, tossing it your way through the duct. He hurled it toward the nearest vent grate, the tool clanging into the darkness of the shaft. Seconds later, the explosion rocked the ship. Not the charges, but a controlled breach from within. The force of Kai's improvisation clearing the path with a rumble. Alarms wailed anew as Kai's voice cut through. "Path's clearing now. Hold for 2 more minutes, reinforcements incoming." The shadows in the doorway surged forward regardless, gas or no, their resolve unbroken. Alara raised her sidearm once more, Jax falling in at her side with his rifle shouldered. The cost was mounting. Blood on the deck in darkening pools, a ship groaning under fire from without and within. But they weren't done fighting. Not yet, not while hope flickered. Kai's breach tore through the bulkhead like a thunderclap, shards of alloy spraying into the corridor in a deadly hail that forced the leading shadows to scatter. Jax ducked low instinctively, firing a burst from his rifle that scattered the leading shadows. Hulking figures in armored void suits, their visors glinting with cold, alien malice under the strobing lights. Alara flanked him seamlessly, her shots precise and measured, dropping one that twitched and fell silent against the deck, its lance clattering uselessly. "Path's open, move," Kai's voice barked over the comm, ragged with exertion from the vent crawl and the wound slowing him. "But they're swarming the auxiliary shafts now, trying to cut us off. We move fast or get pinned down here." Jax nodded, though Kai couldn't see it from his position, and hauled Alara toward the jagged hole in the wall with a firm grip on her arm. The air hummed with the acrid tang of scorched metal and ozone from the breach, the ship's groans deepening like a beast in its death throes, protesting every violation. He glanced back once over his shoulder. The corridor behind them a haze of smoke and flickering emergency lights, littered with the bodies of their squad mates, friends who'd bought them these precious seconds with their lives. Their faces frozen in final defiance, they piled through the breach into a narrower access tunnel. Kai waiting on the other side with his plasma cutter still glowing red-hot from use, the blade humming faintly. The man was built like a freighter hauler, broad shoulders heaving with labored breaths, but his eyes burned with that unyielding focus Jax had come to rely on in the darkest hours. "Rigged a bypass on the power grid back there," Kai said, slapping a makeshift panel into place over a sparking junction with a clang. "Gives us 5 minutes before the whole section fries from overload, enough to push forward." Alara checked her ammo counter on the sidearm with a quick glance, her face smudged with grime and sweat, the blood from her thigh wound leaving a faint trail. 5 minutes to what exactly? The bridge is 3 decks up and those things are adapting. Saw one shrug off a direct hit to the chest like it was nothing. "Adapting or not, we improvise as we go," Jax replied, pulling a cluster of emergency flares from his vest, the kind meant for signaling hull breaches in the void. Not close quarters combat, but desperate times forged new tools. He cracked one open with a twist, the chemical glow igniting in a harsh white light that cast stark shadows on the tunnel walls, illuminating the grime and scuffs of past repairs. "These burn hot enough to melt their seals if we get close. Kai, you and Alara take point, flush them out ahead. I'll cover the rear and rig the vents behind us to collapse if they follow." Kai grunted approval, hefting his cutter like a club, the blade's edge catching the flare light in a menacing gleam. They pushed forward as a unit, the tunnel sloping upward in a tight spiral that wound through the ship's superstructure, the walls closing in with each meter. Footsteps echoed ahead, skittering, unnatural, like claws on steel grating growing louder with proximity. Alara lobbed a flare ahead into the gloom. It arced gracefully and ignited in a blaze that illuminated a knot of shadows clustered at the junction, their forms recoiling with hisses through their comms, but not before Kai charged, his cutter swinging in a wide arc that severed one's arm at the joint in a spray of fluid. The fight blurred into a frenzy of motion and noise. Jax fired from the rear, picking off stragglers that tried to circle back, his rifle's bursts lighting the tunnel like staccato lightning, while Alara's sidearm cracked steadily, her cautious nature sharpening into lethal efficiency with every shot. One shadow lunged at her from a side vent, its claw raking her shoulder guard. Sparks flew as the armor held, but she twisted and drove her boot into its knee, toppling it for Kai's killing blow with the cutter, the blade sinking deep. "They're herding us toward the core access," Alara panted, blood seeping from a fresh gash under her armor, the pain a dull throb she pushed aside. "Must be a trap waiting up ahead, trying to funnel us into an ambush." Jax felt the deck shudder beneath them, a distant explosion rattling the walls like thunder rolling through the hull. The alien fleet outside was still pounding away, but inside this was their war, personal and visceral. He yanked a loose conduit from the wall with a grunt, sparks dancing at the exposed wires like fireflies in frenzy. "Then we turn it on them. Kai, seal that door behind us once we're through. Alara, mark the next junction on your pad for targeting." They reached the core access point, a wider chamber pulsing with the hum of the ship's heart, massive conduits snaking like veins across the ceiling, coolant lines hissing faintly as they circulated plasma. But the shadows were thicker here, a dozen at least, forming a barricade of scavenged debris, overturned crates, fused wiring, anything to create choke points. One stepped forward from the line, its suit emblazoned with unfamiliar script that glowed faintly. visor tilting as if assessing their resolve. Jax didn't hesitate, jamming the conduit into a nearby panel and overriding the safeties with a jury-rigged shunt from his multi-tool, fingers working with the speed of long practice. Alarms blared in warning. Proximity breach, system overload imminent. The chamber lights strobed erratically, and suddenly the conduits vented steam in controlled bursts, scalding the front line of shadows with superheated vapor. They shrieked in unison, suits bubbling and cracking under the intense heat, forms collapsing as seals failed. "Go through the gap now," Jax roared, charging forward with Kai and Alara at his flanks. Bullets and cutter met flesh and armor in a cacophony of impacts, bodies piling up as they carved a bloody path through the line, the air thick with the stench of burnt chitin and ozone. Alara took a glancing hit to the leg from a wild lance shot, staggering but firing back with grim determination, her wit flashing in a grim quip amid the melee. If this is their funeral, they're overdressed for the occasion. They broke through at last, slamming the hatch behind them with a resounding clang, but the cost echoed in the blood on their hands and the limp Alara now favored, her face pale under the grime. The bridge was close now, one more deck to clear, but the ship's warning screamed of failing shields, the hull integrity dropping with each external volley. Humanity's grit had brought them this far through the stars. Surrender wasn't written in their fates. Jax gripped the bulkhead as the deck shuddered once more, the alien ship's corridors twisting like a dying beast under the relentless assault from within and without. Alarms wailed in a discordant symphony that filled the air, red emergency lights painting the walls in bloody hues, casting everything in a hellish glow. "Shields at 20% and falling," Kai muttered, his fingers flying over a jury-rigged datapad scavenged from one of the fallen intruders, its alien interface partially translated by a hasty hack. He was the cautious one, always calculating odds and contingencies, but even his voice cracked with the strain of the prolonged fight, the wound on his side a constant throb. One more hit from their batteries out there, and we're vapor, no coming back from that. Alara leaned against the opposite wall for support, her leg wound hastily bound with strips torn from a discarded uniform, the makeshift bandage already darkening with blood. She forced a grin through the pain, witty even as exhaustion clawed at her edges. Vapor? Sounds almost poetic, like something out of those old frontier tales. Better than rotting in some cryopod back home, waiting for the next invasion wave. She tested her weight on the leg, winced sharply, then leveled her rifle with determination, the stock pressing into her shoulder like an anchor. Jax shot her a look. Brave words, but don't push it too far, but said nothing aloud. Words were luxuries they couldn't afford in this moment, with every second a gamble. The hatch to the next deck hissed open at Jax's override command, revealing a narrow service tunnel choked with sparking conduits and the faint haze of coolant vapor. Shadows flickered ahead in the dimness. More of the Xenos, their elongated forms silhouetted against the glow of failing panels, moving with eerie precision. These weren't the frontline grunts scrambling in the lower decks. These moved with drilled coordination, energy lances humming low in standby mode, ready to unleash hell. Jax raised a fist, signaling halt to the group, his eyes scanning for the best approach. "Flank 'em carefully. Kai, cover low from the left. Alara, pick your shots, make them count, no wild sprays." They moved like a single organism, boots silent on the grated floor despite the limp and wounds, years of drills kicking in amid the adrenaline. Kai slid into position first, his burst from the scavenged pulse gun chewing through the nearest shadow's cover, the debris exploding in a cloud. It crumpled with a guttural cry that echoed down the tunnel, but the others retaliated instantly, lances slicing the air with searing beams, melting a handrail inches from Jax's head in a shower of molten droplets. He rolled aside, firing from the hip with instinctive accuracy, the recoil a familiar jolt against his shoulder that grounded him. Grit had carried humanity this far across the galaxy. Now it was pure instinct guiding their hands, survival distilled to its essence. Alara's shot took down a second Xeno, her aim steady despite the limp that slowed her pivot. "That's for the leg you bastards gave me," she hissed through clenched teeth. But a lance grazed her arm in return, sizzling through fabric and skin in a line of agony. She dropped to one knee, cursing under her breath as pain flared. But Jax was on her in seconds, hauling her up with a strong arm around her waist. "Stay with me, we've got this." The tunnel narrowed further, forcing them into single-file formation, and the Xenos pressed the advantage. their numbers swelling from side vents like a hive awakening, coordinated strikes probing for weakness. Kai's datapad beeped urgently in his hand, a warning overlay flashing. They're rerouting power through the walls, sealing us in to trap the rats. The bulkheads groaned as irises began to shut behind them, cutting off any retreat with mechanical finality, the gaps narrowing like closing jaws. Jax's mind raced through options, synapses firing in the heat of battle. No way back, no time for finesse or elaborate plans. He scanned the tunnel quickly. Exposed wiring snaking along the walls, a cluster of coolant lines overhead fragile under the ongoing strain, their insulation cracked from vibrations. Human ingenuity sparked in his thoughts. A reckless idea, but better than dying trapped like vermin. "Cover me, I've got an idea," Jax barked, slinging his rifle over his shoulder and climbing the ladder to the ceiling access with urgent pulls, ignoring the burn in his wounded arm. Kai and Alara laid down, suppressing fire in tandem, bolts of energy lighting the confined space like a storm, pinning the Xenos as they advanced. Jax pried at the panel above with gritted teeth, sparks biting through his gloves like angry insects, until the coolant line gave way under his multi-tool. With a final twist, he severed it clean, the supercooled gas venting in a white fog that bloomed instantly, flash freezing the air and everything in its path. The Xenos shrieked as the frost locked their limbs in place, suits cracking like eggshells under the thermal shock, forms staggering in the blinding haze. Jax dropped back down to the deck, grabbing Alara's arm to steady her. "Run, through the fog now before it clears." They bolted forward through the swirling white, the tunnel opening up to the bridge approach amid the chaos. But the cost mounted with every step. Alara's breaths came ragged and shallow, her wounds slowing her pace, and Kai's pad flickered with warnings of multiple hull breaches, the ship bleeding integrity. The Xenos vessel was wounded, battered from the fight, but so were they. Humanity's defiance buying mere seconds, not true salvation, as the stars wheeled outside. One final hatch loomed ahead, guarded by automated turrets whirring to life with a mechanical grind, barrels spinning up. Jax met Kai's eyes, then Alara's in the fading mist. No speeches, no time for sentiment, just a shared nod of unbreakable will. They charged as one, the end in sight. Jax slammed his shoulder into the bulkhead beside the hatch, the control panel hissing under his gauntlet as he initiated the override, fingers dancing over the keys. Bullets from the turret stitched the deck plating behind them, chewing through metal like hungry insects devouring a carcass, the impact sending vibrations up their spines. Kai slid low across the deck, his datapad clutched like a shield, fingers flying over the interface to jam the targeting arrays with a hasty code injection, frequencies shifting on them. Damn adaptive code, it's rewriting itself. Kai grunted, sweat beading on his brow despite the chill air from the lingering fog. A stray round clipped his boot, sending him sprawling, but he rolled with the momentum, cursing fluently as he kept typing, refusing to let go. Alara fired her scavenged pulse rifle from a crouch, the blue bolts scorching the turret mounts but barely slowing the whir of servos, the weapons compensating with eerie intelligence. Her side ached where the earlier shrapnel had torn through. Each breath a knife twist in her ribs, but she gritted her teeth and aimed true, the reticle steady in her HUD. "Jax, the manual override, it's exposed on the side panel." He nodded, wrenching the panel free with a screech of tearing circuits that echoed like a scream. Sparks danced across his visor in a dazzling display, but he plunged the multi-tool into the wiring nest without flinching, bridging connections with desperate precision. The nearest turret locked onto him, its barrel spinning up with a whine that promised swift oblivion, the targeting laser painting his chest red. "Got it, rerouting power now," Kai yelled triumphantly, his pad beeping in confirmation as the hack took hold. The turret stuttered mid-fire, its barrage spraying wild into the ceiling in a hail of ricochets, but the second one compensated instantly, zeroing in on Jax's exposed back with mechanical inevitability. Alara lunged without thought, tackling him aside just as the burst ripped through where he'd stood, the deck erupting in molten fury. They hit the deck hard together, her rifle skittering away into the shadows. Pain lanced through her ribs like a fresh wound, but she shoved it down deep, scrambling on hands and knees for the weapon amid the debris. "Keep going, don't stop." Jax yanked a cluster of conduits loose from the wall, bridging them with a bare wire stripped from his suit's emergency repair kit. The hatch groaned in response, servos reversing with a hydraulic protest, but the turret's barrage intensified, forcing Kai to dive behind a nearby crate for cover. Shrapnel pinged off his armor in a deadly rhythm, one fragment slicing his cheek open in a shallow cut that welled blood. Almost there, bypass engaged. Jax roared over the din, his voice raw. The hatch cracked open at last, revealing the bridge beyond. A cavernous space of glowing consoles and holographic star maps swirling in chaos. The Xenos command crew twisting in alarm as the humans burst through, but victory tasted like blood and ash sharp on the tongue. Ilara's vision blurred at the edges from blood loss and exhaustion as she covered their retreat into the chamber, her shots growing erratic, but no less determined. Kai hauled her up with a strong arm, half dragging her through the widening gap as Jax sealed it behind them just as the